Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're breaking down a huge Supreme Court case that could seriously change everything you see on your social media feed, in your search results, and maybe even in your ride-sharing app. It all boils down to this one simple but incredibly complex question. Who gets to be the editor-in-chief of your online world? Is it the platform, the company that built the whole thing? Or is it the government, which is arguing it needs to step in to make sure things are fair? And this gets us to the real heart of the legal battle. So on one side, you have platforms like Facebook and YouTube. They're claiming a First Amendment right to what's called editorial choice. They argue that choosing what content to show you is a form of speech, just like a newspaper picking its front page stories. But on the other side, you've got state governments saying, whoa, hold on. These companies are so powerful now, they need to be regulated so they can't just censor viewpoints they don't like. To really get a grip on this fight, we actually have to go back a bit. We need to look at a key legal idea that's been around for decades, way before the internet was even a thing: editorial discretion. For a really long time, courts have said that private companies and groups have the right to control their own message. See, the First Amendment isn't just about your right to speak. It's also about your right not to be forced to share a message you totally disagree with. And this protection, it exists on a kind of spectrum. For instance, the Supreme Court has ruled that if you're actively putting together a message, like a newspaper or a parade, you get really strong First Amendment protection. But for places that are more like passive, open spaces, say a shopping mall, the court has found they have a much weaker claim to control what people say there. And that right there, that is the billion-dollar question. Are these social media sites more like newspapers where they're carefully curating everything, or are they more like shopping malls, just open public squares? The real challenge, of course, is that they kind of act like both. So things really started to heat up, fueled by claims that platforms were unfairly censoring conservative voices, especially after some really high-profile political figures got suspended. Two states decided, you know what, we're going to force the issue. And so in 2021, Texas and Florida passed these laws that were the first of their kind. They were a direct challenge to the entire tech industry's control over content, basically moving from just political arguments to these massive, sweeping legal rules. Okay, let's break this down. Because the two states took very different paths. Texas passed this really broad law about viewpoint neutrality, basically saying platforms can't remove content just because of the political opinion it expresses. Florida, on the other hand, focused on consistent application, demanding that platforms apply their own rules the same way for everybody. And they even threw in special protections for politicians and journalists. Well, as you can imagine, a tech trade group called NetChoice, representing companies like Meta and Google, immediately challenged both of these laws. After things got messy with conflicting rulings in the lower courts, the stage was set for a massive First Amendment showdown at the Supreme Court in a case we now call Moody v. NetChoice. So, everyone was watching. We all expected a clear answer, finally, to that newspaper versus shopping mall question. But pretty quickly, the justices realized that whole analogy was just way too simple, and this case was a lot more complicated than anyone thought. So instead of picking a winner, the court essentially punted. They decided that the tech companies trying to strike down the entire laws at once was just too broad. Because these laws could affect everything from your social media feed to services like Gmail or even Uber. The court sent the cases back down, saying, hey, we can't make a final call without way more specific facts. But, and this is a really big but, the court didn't leave us completely in the dark. Writing for the majority, Justice Kagan did state a core principle very clearly. When a platform curates its feed, when it decides what to show you and how to show it, that is a form of speech. It's an expressive choice, and it is protected by the First Amendment. Now, this is where it gets really interesting for the modern internet. Justice Barrett raised a critical question. While she agreed that human choices are protected, she wondered if the same thing applies to automated, AI-driven moderation. If an algorithm is just trying to get you to click on more stuff, is that really an expressive choice that deserves the same kind of powerful First Amendment protection? And then Justice Alito threw another huge wrench in the works. He argued that the whole newspaper analogy just completely falls apart when you think about the sheer scale of these platforms. With billions of videos and posts being uploaded, he basically asked, how can a platform like YouTube ever be seen as having one single coherent message? What all these different opinions show is that there was no simple consensus here.
The justices were clearly struggling with how to apply legal principles from the 18th century to technology from the 21st century, and that led to this really fractured ruling that honestly solved very little in the short term.
So the court punted. What in the world does that actually mean for the future of your feed? Well, even without a clear winner, this decision has absolutely huge consequences. This ruling creates what we can call the Moody effect. First, it's now much harder for tech companies to just get new regulations thrown out right away. Future legal fights are going to be way more specific, focusing on how a law impacts one feature, like a newsfeed versus your DMs. This also pushes states to write smarter, more targeted laws. But at the end of the day, the biggest questions are still unanswered, leaving everyone in the state of major uncertainty. And that's the big, provocative question this decision leaves us with. It throws out the simple analogies we've been using and forces us all to ask something new. This case didn't end the war over online speech, it just set the rules for the next, and probably far more complex, round of battles.